Gourmet Sentai Bara Yarou is no perfect game. The controls are kinda clunky, the music is pretty meh, and the gameplay is repetitive. But boy does a little bit of weird go a long way. Thanks to the downright zaniness contained within this beat-em-up, Gourmet Sentai Bara Yarou manages to coast past mediocrity straight into "this is weird and I need to see more" territory. Released on the Super Famicom in 1995, Gourmet Sentai Bara Yarou is another one of those very Japanese games, like Flying Hero or Cho Aniki, and one could easily assume this was an entry in the latter. Combat in this game is easily described as sort of clunky. Getting off a chain of punches and kicks just doesn't have that same flow as, say, a Final Fight or a Streets of Rage. This isn't helped by your semi-glacial moving speed either. Despite that, combat still manages to feel good enough, especially when you line up a massive combo or send a boss to the ground after a flurry of hits. On the topic of combos, each character has a decent arsenal of attacks to unleash. You not only have your typical punches and kicks, but upon inputting certain button commands, you can fire off even deadlier moves. For example, if you press down and Y when you jump, you'll do a head drop or a spin kick. If you double tap a direction and press A, you can do a slide kick. Or if you grab an enemy and repeatedly press L and R, you can unleash even heavier attacks like a massive pile driver. Or, of course, you can just flex on your foes instead. That's right, you have a button solely dedicated to flexing your muscles. Yeah, show them what they're missing. Jokes aside, the move list for the game is quite expansive compared to most in the genre, which keeps the combat fresh. The array of enemies at your disposal are just as crazy as you'd hope. From small people riding giant tiki heads to bunny girls in mech suits, weird alien creatures with light bulbs in their heads, and of course, super buff dudes. There is no shortage of outlandish punching bags to wail on throughout the game. In a beat-em-up, the next best thing to the fighting should be the spectacle. And much like the enemies, the stage design and bosses have a good amount of character. In what other game can you fight a giant needle man on top of a moving train made of metal feet with a massive Buddha statue flying in the background? Can you fight Zordon's wife next to a giant pit of lava in Final Fight? I don't think so. It doesn't stop there, as you can battle Houdini's extra buff brother inside the stomach of a xenomorph too. And if you thought this game couldn't get any weirder, then let me introduce you to the cooking segments. I'm not joking, in between levels there are short bonus rounds where you can take the ingredients that enemies leave behind, like tofu, mushrooms, and salad, to create a Frankenstein's monster of a meal that can replenish some health. I've already mentioned that the music is somewhat bland. The samples feel uninspired and sound very stock, but the game more than makes up for the snore of a soundtrack with its extremely entertaining sound design. Enemies, bosses, and attacks have quite the assortment of sounds, including rabid screaming from the second boss, the occasional comedic sound effect, and what sounds like a sedated voice actor falling asleep while recording her sounds, among others. Gourmet Sentai Bara Yarou is one of those games that comes recommended on spectacle alone. It's chock full of off-the-wall Japanese humor and wackiness. And while that certainly carries the game at great length, it still has its shortcomings. Like I said, it's a tad bit clunky, the music is pretty subpar, and like most beat-em-ups, it's quite repetitive. Not to mention its fairly short length, lasting only 5 levels and a final boss fight. The biggest kicker is that this is both a cheap and not so cheap game to track down, as it has a small cult following, so expect to spend upwards of $300 for an original loose copy and add an extra $200 for a boxed copy. The upside is that the game was repressed a few years back, so a newer copy will only run you about $60, or you could simply head over to Steam and spend $12 to get the officially translated English release, which I had no idea existed prior to this review. With a game like this, it's hard not to recommend it. It's that perfect game to unexpectedly break out with your gaming buddies, especially if they've never heard of it. So if you need a good dose of weird in your life, then Gourmet Sentai Bara Yarou is the perfect contender.